From One to Many mission. I'm Chris Gebhardt with SpaceX Communications, and thank you for joining all of us from Hawthorne and Florida tonight. Today we are launching 4 satellites into a geosynchronous transfer orbit on behalf of our customer Astranis. Astranis is calling this mission From One to Many because the launch will grow their fleet of geostationary satellites from 1 to 5. One of the satellites launching today is Astranis' UtilitySat, the world's first geostationary satellite capable of performing multiple operational communications missions. The first customer for UtilitySat will be APCO in Mexico, and the satellite will serve a variety of customers for shorter duration missions throughout its life on orbit. The other 3 satellites are split across 3 of Astranis' customers, with 2 satellites, NuView Alpha and NuView Bravo, supporting Anuvu, a connectivity provider for planes and ships. The 4th satellite, Aguila, will be the first ever communications satellite dedicated to the people of the Philippines. Now, today's launch will mark SpaceX's 133rd launch of 2024. And at Slick 40, both the vehicle and the range are green, and we are on track for an on-time liftoff today. Weather is also looking great, with only a 20% chance of violation. As we continue counting down here just over 10 minutes to launch, let's take a moment to meet the vehicle that will be taking our payload to orbit today. Falcon 9 is a 2-stage rocket developed and manufactured by SpaceX and known for its safe, reliable, and cost-effective access to space. It is also the first and currently the only orbital-class rocket capable of reflight. Starting at the top of the vehicle is the payload fairing, a protective shell that encases the Astranis payload being sent to space today. Made up of 2 halves, the fairing will separate from the vehicle once Falcon 9 has climbed out of Earth's dense lower atmosphere. Today's fairing halves will be flying for their 22nd and 12th times respectively, and will be recovered by our recovery vessel Doug after launch. And here you can see a photo of those Astranis satellites being encapsulated inside their payload fairing before flight. After that encapsulation was complete, the payload fairing and the Astranis satellites were taken to our integration facility, where they were attached to the top of the Falcon 9 rocket, where they sit today. Continuing down the vehicle, we have the 2nd stage. The 2nd stage is powered by a single Merlin vacuum engine, or MVAC, which is optimized to perform in the vacuum of space. Below that is the 1st stage, which contains 8 engines arranged around one center engine, all of which are held in place by a structure called the octaweb. Each of these 9 Merlin 1D engines delivers about 190,000 pounds of thrust at sea level, which gives Falcon 9 a combined 1.7 million pounds of thrust during liftoff. The Falcon 9 first stage is also equipped with 4 landing legs that deploy to allow for a vertical landing on either a drone ship or a landing pad. The booster supporting today's mission is flying for its 7th time, having previously supported the Crew 8, Polaris Dawn, CRS-31, and 3 Starlink missions. After stage separation, the 1st stage will head back to Earth, this time targeting a landing on our drone ship, a Shortfall of Gravitas, currently stationed downrange in the Atlantic Ocean. At T-minus 7 minutes, 55 seconds and counting, let's take a moment to hear from our customer for today's mission, Astranis.
Our first satellite was the first of its kind. Small, low cost, high orbit. From higher orbits, you only need 1 satellite.
You don't need hundreds, you don't need thousands, you just need 1. But for us, putting up 1 was just the beginning.
We are Astranis.
Our first product, the MicroGEO, connects the unconnected.
The satellites we build are points of national pride.
And each one of them connects millions of people to affordable, low-cost internet.
But our mission doesn't stop with comms.
And it doesn't stop with geo.
We're working with Space Force to bring resiliency to the GPS satellite system.
We're also working to connect and protect astronauts on the moon.
And maybe someday we'll even build a habitat that they'll call home. We're the only company building this today. Why? Because space is hard and high orbits are harder. The radiation environment fries normal hardware in days or even hours. And medium-class rockets can't even get you all the way there.
We had to invent an entirely new class of spacecraft. It took us years, but after countless radiation tests and revisions, we made it happen.
That's why we're ramping up production right here in America.
We've built 5 satellites, sold 12, and plan to launch over 100 satellites by 2030. That's more than the rest of the industry combined.
We are Astranis. We invented low-cost, high-orbit satellites.
We're building the future.
And we're just getting started.
And at 6 minutes, 10 seconds to go, we have begun chilling down those 9 Merlin 1D engines at the bottom of Falcon 9's first stage, thermally conditioning them ahead of liftoff. Now, Falcon 9's primary objective today is to launch the 4 Astranis satellites into a geosynchronous transfer orbit, or GTO. After liftoff, about a minute into flight, the rocket will reach max Q, or maximum aerodynamic pressure, as Falcon 9 accelerates through the thick lower atmosphere. About 2.5 minutes into flight, Falcon 9 will arrive at its second major flight milestone, main engine cutoff, or MECO. Immediately following MECO, the first and second stages will separate, and following stage separation, the second stage's single MVAC engine will ignite during second engine start, or SES-1, allowing the second stage to continue carrying the satellites to their intended orbit today. A little less than a minute later, the payload fairing will separate, exposing the Astranis satellites to space for the first time. Meanwhile, the first stage will perform its entry burn as it re-enters Earth's atmosphere, slowing down and reducing the heat and stress on the vehicle as it heads toward a landing. About a minute after the first stage entry burn ends, the second stage will then shut down its MVAC engine.
Falcon 9 tanks are pressing for strong back retract.
And you can hear there that Falcon 9 is pressurizing ahead of strong back retract, which will happen just under a minute from now. Following the end of the entry burn, the second stage will shut down its MVAC engine after reaching its initial parking orbit today. And a few seconds after that, Falcon 9's first stage booster is set to land on a short
strong back lower has started.
Gravitas drone ship. And there you can hear callouts for the retraction of the strong back. You can see 2 cradle arms there just below the payload fairing that says Astranis, and you can see those cradle arms opening now. In just a few seconds, the transporter erector will pull back by a few degrees to its pre-liftoff position. Now, the TE is the large truss structure that you can see barely pulling back from Falcon 9 there. This transport is designed to raise and support Falcon 9 at the launch pad, using umbilicals or flexible lines to route the vehicle's fluids, power, and telemetry from the ground systems to the rocket and the payload until Falcon 9 switches to internal power just before liftoff. At this point in the countdown, both the first and second stages are nearly loaded with 1 million pounds of rocket-grade kerosene and liquid oxygen. Both the first and second stages should finish wrapping up propellant loading here, with the first stage ending about 23 seconds from now at the 3-minute mark, and the second stage following about a minute later at T-minus 2 minutes. After that, the next major event will come at T-minus 60 seconds when Falcon 9 will enter startup. This means that Falcon 9's autonomous internal flight computers have taken control of the launch countdown. After that, just inside of T-minus 2 seconds, we will light the 9 Merlin 1D engines ahead of liftoff. Right now, weather is still looking green, and the range is ready to support our T0 of 12 a.m. Eastern Time.
Stage 1 LOX load complete.
And there you hear confirmation that propellant load onto the first stage has been completed ahead of the launch of the Astranis from One-to-Many mission, which is carrying 4 satellites into a geosynchronous transfer orbit today and will help build Astranis' fleet of geosatellites from 1 to 5. We are just a few seconds away from the second stage completing its propellant load. As a reminder, this will be our
Stage 2 LOX load complete.
Our 133rd launch of the year, with 1 more to go. And you also heard confirmation that the second stage has completed propellant load. The white vapors that you see venting from the transporter erector is normal and is part of our process for closing out the vehicle and ground systems ahead of launch.
Ground gas closeouts.
And there you hear good confirmation that ground gas closeouts are complete, meaning that we are preparing Falcon 9's ground support system for launch today as well.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
And there we have good confirmation that Falcon 9 has taken control of the launch count and its tanks are being pressurized for liftoff today.
LD, go for launch.
And with our final confirmation that we are go for launch, let's sit back and watch Falcon 9 take the Astranis from one-to-many mission into orbit 35 seconds from now.
T-minus 30 seconds. Fifteen seconds. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Mission and liftoff. Go Falcon, go Astranis.
Vehicle is pitching dead range.
Stage 1 propulsion is nominal.
And 30 seconds into the flight, Falcon 9 has successfully lifted off from Space Launch Complex 40, and we heard some good initial callouts there for power and telemetry nominal and the vehicle pitching onto the proper course for launch today. After clearing the tower,
Power and telemetry nominal.
After clearing the tower today, we tilted or gimbaled the engines to initiate a roll maneuver on Falcon 9. This enables the vehicle's antennas to stay in the best position for communicating with the ground while also slightly pitching the rocket over onto the correct flight path.
Vehicle is supersonic.
And we hear confirmation there that we are supersonic, approaching max Q, or the moment of maximum aerodynamic pressure.
Max Q.
And there you hear a good call out that we have passed max Q. From this point on, while Falcon 9 is still accelerating to an orbital speed of approximately 17,500 miles per hour, aerodynamic forces on the vehicle will continue to decrease as we approach
chill is underway.
The vacuum of space. And as you can hear there, we have started to thermally condition the second stage's single MVAC engine for its ignition coming up just under 1 minute from now. Prior to around that same ignition time, we will have a series of events in rapid succession, the first of which will be main engine cutoff, or MECO, of the first stage booster. That will be followed shortly by stage separation, followed by second engine start 1, or SES1, on the second stage, and followed after that we will have separation of Falcon's payload fairings. Let's watch for those events coming up back to back here in just about 15 seconds.
Main engine cutoff.
Stage separation confirmed.
MVAC ignition.
And there we had a good MECO stage separation and ignition of the MVAC second stage engine. You can see now on the bottom left-hand portion of your screen the velocity and altitude data for stage 1 booster, and on the bottom right-hand side of your screen you can see the speed and altitude for stage 2, taking the 4 Astranis satellites to orbit today.
Fairing separation confirmed.
And there you heard and saw a good separation of our payload fairing. Both of the payload fairing halves on today's mission are flight proven, with one half flying for its 22nd time and the other for its 12th. Both of these fairings will now parachute down to the Atlantic Ocean, where we will be attempting to retrieve them on our recovery vessel, Doug. And you can see there that stage 2 currently has a velocity of about 10,600 kilometers per hour. We're looking for a velocity of about 27,000 kilometers per hour at engine cutoff today. Now, 4 minutes, 30 seconds into today's mission, our next major milestone in flight will be stage 1's entry burn, which will take place just past the 6-minute mark into flight. For this entry burn, we relight 3 of the M1D engines on the first stage booster, which is similar to pumping the brakes to slow the vehicle down as it passes back into Earth's atmosphere. The entry burn helps us reduce the heat generated from the friction of the atmosphere and reduces aerodynamic forces acting on Falcon. And reducing those aerodynamic forces are very important, as it helps us maintain controlled flight, prepare the booster for landing, and also helps us with refurbishment and reuse. Now, during that entry burn today, Falcon 9 will be decelerating by firing its Merlin engines, but it will still be traveling really fast, which causes the booster to fly through the Merlin engine's exhaust gases, or plume. This deposits a layer of soot on the outside of the vehicle, and that soot comes from the carbon-based fuel that Falcon 9 uses. Now, with each flight, that soot builds up a little bit more on the outside of the vehicle, and that's what gives the Falcon 9 first stages their distinctive reuse look. And you can see in the bottom left-hand portion of your screen the speed for stage 1 increasing as its altitude decreases. You'll see that speed rapidly drop when we get to our entry burn and relight those 3 Merlin 1D engines. Now, reusability is also key to lowering the cost of access for spaceflight, which enables more investment in critical scientific research. The Falcon 9 first stage supporting today's mission will be performing this entry burn for its 7th time.
Stage 1 entry burn startup. Stage 1 FTS has safed.
And there we can see that entry burn underway, as well as the call out that the flight termination system on the first stage has safed. Gorgeous views from that onboard camera from the first stage there. And you can see that speed dropping rapidly now on the first stage as well.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
And there is confirmation of entry burn shutdown. Coming up in just under a minute, we are expecting second engine stage cutoff, or SECO-1, as the second stage enters its preliminary parking orbit. This will come before our landing of the first stage booster on the mission today.
Second stage in terminal guidance.
Good call out that stage 2 is nearing its initial orbit. You can see the stage 2 velocity increasing
as stage 1 transonic.
The stage 1 velocity.
Stage 2 FTS has safed.
As stage 1 continues to decelerate, and we had a good call there that the vehicles are following good trajectories and that the flight termination system on stage 2 has safed itself as stage 2 prepares to enter orbit.
MVAC shutdown.
Stage 1 landing burn.
And with stage 2 shutting down its MVAC engine, stage 1 is performing its landing burn, heading toward a shortfall of gravitas.
Nominal orbit insertion. Landing leg deployed. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
And there is our first stage booster standing tall on a short follow gravitas, completing its 7th launch and recovery. This was overall SpaceX's 389th recovery of an orbital class rocket, including first stage landings of our Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy fleet. Now, with that, we are going to take a short break as the second stage continues in its first coast period. When we return, the second stage will relight its MVAC engine for a second time, which we refer to as Second Engine Start 2, or SES-2. This second burn will last just under a minute, and then about 6 minutes later, the 4 spacecraft will begin to separate from the second stage. Until then, enjoy some cool space tunes, and we'll be back here in about 15 minutes. And welcome back. We are now just over 25 minutes into the Astranis from One to Many mission and coming up on Second Engine Start 2, or SES-2. Coming up in just over a minute, we will have the second ignition of Stage 2 for a short burn, which will last for just under a minute and culminate with what we refer to as Second Engine Cutoff 2, or SES-2. Now, this burn is designed to send and change Falcon 9's orbit into a true geostationary transfer orbit, which will allow us to deploy the Astranis satellites into their intended orbit today. About 6 minutes after this burn is complete, we will have our first payload deploy. And that burn should be coming up in about 30 seconds from now. You can see great views of Falcon 9's second stage here being lit by the sun as our second stage has passed into orbital daylight. And as always, you can follow along with the speed increase that this burn will impart to Falcon 9 on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. And there we see the ignition of the second stage MVAC engine. And as a reminder, the ice that you saw around the engine nozzle there at ignition is normal. Again, this burn will last for just about a minute and put the second stage into the proper transfer orbit as it prepares to deploy the 4 Astranis satellites on board. And right on schedule, you see the shutdown there of our MVAC engine for Second Engine Cutoff 2, or SECO 2. With that, we are almost at the finish line for today's mission, but we still have one final coast to go before we begin deploying the 4 Astranis satellites on board today. This will be a short coast, so don't go anywhere. We'll be back with you all in about 5 minutes. See you then.
Nominal insertion.
Hello and welcome back to the Astranis From One to Many mission. We had an on-time liftoff tonight at 12 a.m. Eastern Time from Space Launch Complex 40 at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. Following that launch, the first stage booster successfully returned to Earth and landed on our drone ship a short fall of gravitas, marking its 7th flight and recovery. We also had 2 successful ignitions and shutdowns of our second stage MVAC engine and are in the correct transfer orbit for payload deployment of the 4 Astranis satellites. The deployment of those satellites is expected to be about a minute apart from each other, and the first satellite to be deployed will be the Astranis Utility Sat. Now, Astranis calls this mission From One to Many because they are growing their fleet of geostationary satellites from 1 to 5 with this launch. Their first satellite, Arcturus, was launched on a SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket just last year. Now, once these 4 satellites separate from Falcon 9 today in a geosynchronous transfer orbit, they will all use their own onboard electric propulsion thrusters to begin their journey to geostationary orbit, performing slow but efficient orbit raise burns. And we are about 30 seconds away from the deployment of Utility Sat, and we hope to have a good view of it, which you can see here on your screen.
Astranis GS002 separation confirmed.
And there goes our first deployment for the Utility Sat today. Now, the first customer for the Astranis Utility Sat satellite will be APCO in Mexico, and the satellite will serve a variety of other customers for shorter duration missions throughout its life on orbit. Now, coming up in about 30 seconds, we will have deployment of our next satellite, which will be the NuView Bravo satellite, followed by NuView Alpha. The NuView Bravo will be deployed first and will help support Anuvu, a connectivity provider for planes, ships, and other vehicles.
Astranis GS004 separation confirmed.
And there you hear and see confirmation of NuView Bravo's deployment. Up next in about 45 seconds will be deployment of the NuView Alpha satellite. Together with NuView Bravo, these 2 satellites will collectively cover the entire continental United States, improving in-flight connectivity for Anuvu's customers on planes, ships, and other vehicles. And you can see great views here from Falcon 9's payload cameras of Earth there in the upper part of your screen, and one of our 2 remaining satellites to be deployed down in the lower right-hand side of your screen.
Astranis GS003 separation confirmed.
And there you see and hear confirmation of NuView Alpha's deployment. It's joining NuView Bravo on their collective mission. And coming up shortly will be deployment of our 4th and final satellite today, which will be the Aguila satellite, which was named by the President of the Philippines. Aguila will be the first ever communications satellite dedicated to the Philippines and is named after the Philippines' national bird. And there you can see the Aguila satellite preparing for deployment in about 10 seconds.
Astranis GS005 separation confirmed. All payload separations confirmed.
And there you see the deployment of the Agila satellite, completing our deployment of the 4 Astranis satellites on today's mission, as Astranis is now well on its way to growing their fleet of geostationary satellites from 1 to 5. Now, today's mission marked SpaceX's 133rd launch of the year, but we're not done yet. We still have one more coming up tomorrow before we ring in the new year. Be sure to follow us at SpaceX on X to keep up with all the latest updates. But before we sign off, we want to thank Astranis for entrusting us with today's mission, the Eastern Range and the FAA for their ongoing support, and of course, all of you for joining us tonight. Thank you all for tuning in, and we will see you again.